Good
And Natalie also.
Yeah. This,
Um, on, on behalf of Terry and the British High Commission, let me welcome everyone, the panelists, especially Mr. Mohapatra, and all the participants to this webinar on green financing for enabling climate action. This is the second webinar in a 4-webinar series. The first one yesterday focused on transport, and tomorrow and day after, the webinars will focus on adaptation and resilience and on nature-based solutions. These are in consonance with the kinds of actions that the world thinks are necessary, and they are also the themes for COP26, which the UK will host in November 2021. As we get together today, I want to thank our partners, the British High Commission in India, for this partnership. I also want to thank all the people who have gathered together to take this discussion one step further. I'm particularly grateful to Mr. Mohapatra for agreeing to be with us and to share the very important issues as far as financing is concerned. We obviously believe that financing is the key to no matter what kinds of actions we take. By the way, at Terry, we believe that actions that we take should be those which further here and now development goals, and as a co-benefit also enable us to achieve large carbon reduction goals as well. But if we move from solutions that are high carbon to those which are low or zero carbon, very often the first cost is high, even though over a period of time we may recover that cost, especially because fuels are not needed. But this means that there is a financing problem. Upfront, there's a greater need for financing, though certainly it can be returned or managed over a lifetime of operations. It is important, therefore, that we look at the financing picture in its entirety. We are also looking at the pledge by the OECD, by the developed countries, of enabling approximately $100 billion per year of financing for green options by 2020, and it is anticipated that it should be more beyond that. What has been the progress on it? I would like the panelists to discuss this as well. We therefore have two panels today. One focused on mobilizing green finance. How do we get this money there? If we need more money than we would otherwise, agreed that we put in greener options, say solar plus storage instead of coal-based power stations. But if the capital cost is more, how does that additional cost flow in? I think that is an important issue. The issue of mobilizing becomes important. Similarly, there is a range of actions that I presume that our panelists will say are needed. They include international actions, they include internal policy actions. And therefore, as we transition to a green financial system, what are the kinds of changes? We can have a whole menu of them. But I think we will need to prioritize. We will need to see what is needed upfront so that we attract the green finance and then move to those kinds of changes which would help us to manage this green finance over a period of time. We have I have with me Natalie Toms. Miss Natalie Toms is the counselor in charge of economic affairs in the British High Commission. I'm delighted that we have her with us, welcoming you all and sharing our own thoughts on this. And then we have the keynote address being delivered by Dr. Mahapatra, who is the Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and specifically looking at issues related to carbon finance. So Natalie, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Mathur. It's great to be here with you again today and with your colleagues in Terry. And once again, thank you for the fantastic partnership on this really important seminar series. As you said, the series of seminars is coming at an important time. It's 5 years after the Paris Agreement, 1 year before COP26, and it should be a great opportunity for policymakers, business and civil society experts to come together to discuss these important issues. And as you said, particularly fantastic to have Dr. Mohapatra here today on this subject. As the host of COP26, the UK, of course, wants it to be a moment when the world comes together united in climate action. And India is a central partner in this. Both of our prime ministers are committed to working closely together, including through the brilliant India-led International Solar Alliance and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. But as you've said, Dr. Mathur, there'll be 5 themes for action running through COP26, under each of which countries will come together to support each other in reducing emissions. It's been great to cover 4 of those themes this week. Great to be here yesterday at the session on electric mobility. But I have to say, I'm particularly delighted to be here today for this discussion on finance, which is of such central importance to this issue. And as you said, climate finance, of course, means both public and private finance. Public finance has an absolutely critical role to play. And as COP hosts, we'll be working to make sure that other developed countries focus on this, in addition to continuing to walk the walk ourselves. But private finance also has a big role to play in generating the trillions of dollars of low carbon investment that is needed around the world. And of course, as you say, public finance can be used to mobilize this vital private financing for green projects. And it would be great to discuss that on the panels further today. First of all, on the panel on mobilization of finance. And of course, second, we have a panel on the financial system itself, on greening the financial system, and on how we can embed climate risk into that financial decision making. In India, the demand for green capital is clearly massive as the country looks to build so much incredible green infrastructure, particularly in renewables, over the next few years and longer. And there's huge scope for the UK and India to work together on this agenda, meeting the demand for green finance in India by leveraging the City of London and the world's global centre. This is a priority for both of our finance ministers. When Finance Minister Sitaraman met Chancellor Rishi Sunak a month or so ago for the 10th Economic and Financial Dialogue, sustainable finance was central to the agenda. And with both finance ministers announcing a new sustainable finance forum between both countries. And of course, we already have a joint green growth equity fund under the NIIF, investing UK and Indian government money together in green projects here, which has also now mobilised its first private sector investment as well. So today's seminar is, among other things, an excellent opportunity to bring together policy experts and practitioners from both countries to deliberate on how we can put forward an actionable agenda on green finance relevant to India's development context. I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I will now turn to Dr. Mohapatra, who, as I mentioned, is the Additional Secretary in the Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, and is specifically dealing with issues relating to climate finance. He has been in the financial sector for quite some time. He has been director in the Capital Markets Division in the ministry. He has been advisor in the Financial Stability and Development Council, which manages financial markets as well as manages the risks in financial stability. Dr. Mohapatra has a MSc in economics from the London School of Economics, and hence a very strong connection with the kind of cooperation that we are doing today, and is yet another part of that collaboration. At least I hope so. I'm putting words in your mouth, Dr. Mohapatra, but it's all yours.
We know how to get out of this. Okay, extremely glad for an introduction which is partly true, because today I handle bilateral cooperation and also multilateral cooperation. So I handle IMF, World Bank, ADB, plus all bilateral cooperation. And Natalie is there as my Indo-UK cooperative partner. We jointly did the economic financial dialogue. I also handle sustainable finance. So that's the context. And thank you very much. And my PhD is from homegrown JNU. So therefore, it is LSE plus JNU that will matter to me, plus the sustainable finance here, which is the topic. To be serious, welcome everybody to this webinar series, and it's being very ably managed by Dr. Ajay Mathur, the Director General TERI. I welcome you for that. Dr. Annapurna Vancheswaran, who is the Senior Director TERI, has also set up a nice forum, and I could hear some nice questions and nice ways of organizing the panelists to answer them. And you have two very important panel items, is very aptly put. One is about mobilizing green finance for enhanced ambition. The other one is for transitioning to green financial system. Ambition is always an enhanced one. So I would like the panelists to tell what do you mean by enhanced ambition? And the other one, we have already been transitioning to green financial system. I would suggest that we suggest a topic, stopping the word transitioning to strengthening the green financial system in India. Because I feel the time is absolutely there to set up a mechanism, a system in place where both the demand side and supply side people understand what they are talking about, and it becomes a smooth flow of finance and activities in the interest of sustainability of the country, of the economy, as well as of the climate. So that being so, let me also tell you that I'm equally happy to be here, because India places high emphasis on achieving its ambitious targets set under the SDG 2030 agenda and NDCs under the Paris Agreement, and we are fully dedicated to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. To this end, I feel green investments across various sectors are imperative to develop more sustainable systems, speed up clean energy transitions, and reduce emissions in pursuit of the goals of the Paris Agreement and even Sustainable Development Agenda. Keeping up with this theme of the webinar today, I would like to stress that India is committed and constructive in its approach to meet climate targets, and will make every effort to make COP26 fruitful. Though it has been pushed a little bit due to COVID, I wish that we have a very, very successful one in the run up to COP26. And the cleaner forms of production essentially required, we all know, a sound financial system. This is more so as estimates points towards the requirement of trillions of dollars to achieve SDGs globally. Hence, the spotlight is now on aligning the financial system with sustainable development. Like any other country, India also needs sound policy frameworks and guiding principles on every front to strengthen its sustainable finance narrative. And I appreciate the leading policymakers in India that have necessitated initiatives in this direction. These regulations and guidance give positive signal to market participants about the intent of the government. India has always believed in the proponents and philosophy of responsible business, and this was rightly embedded in our national voluntary guidelines of social, environmental, and economic responsibilities of business, which was released in 2011. In 2012, our SEBI mandated top 100 listed entities by market capitalization to file BRR on their social and environmental impacts. All of you know that list has now grown to 1,000 entities in December 2019. SEBI has also floated a consultation paper on the issue, and we intend that this emergence of green bond, which is coming up in a big way in India to raise capital, should promote green and sustainable development linked infrastructure worldwide, including India. In India, SEBI has been driving the narrative of green finance primarily by implementing sustainability reporting and disclosure, It has also issued guidelines for issuance of green debt securities in May 2017. We are one of the largest emerging green bond market. All of you are aware about this also. And various flagship schemes have been initiated by India for climate change and meeting nationally determined goals like National Clean Air Program, National Air Quality Index, and the ambition to increase the countrywide renewable energy target to 450 gigawatts as a part of a stronger climate action plan. My colleague Abhishek will be describing you about the government initiative in more details. I wanted to highlight only one aspect, that we are also a founding member of IPSF, the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. And in that, we are all determined. We just completed its first anniversary. In my discussion in that World Forum, I had mentioned it to them that when all of us are not going to build back, we are going to build back better. We meet at a time when we are battling one of the most pressing challenges of our generation. COVID-19 pandemic has severely tested the resilience of nations. The economic impacts of this pandemic continue to be a major cause of concern for all developing countries. We have to collectively think of innovative approaches to handle the impact of the crisis. And this COVID crisis has highlighted the importance of developing more resilient and sustainable energy systems, apart from many other learnings that we get from that. India is committed to meeting the goals. We have made the fight against the pandemic a people's movement, a multi-frontal attack by bringing together efforts of the government, private sector, regulators, and society in general. Our highest priority these days has been to deliver benefits to the most vulnerable society. India recently have announced a very big economic package. I don't get into those details. We give a lot of emphasis on solar and wind energy. Today, we are at a cusp of a historic moment when we become the founding members of an international forum, and we are launching ourselves into the green movement in a big way in terms of setting up a sustainable finance mechanism. I had talked to almost more than 200 participants of even DP-led sustainable finance workshop. I would wish to engage with more people in terms of consulting. Formally with Natalie and others' insistence, we have an Indo-UK working group working towards building a sustainable finance infrastructure, getting ideas from their experience in this field and trying to see what we can do. Fiki is also in touch with me in terms of how to build. So there are various, now it's TERI. So I would suggest TERI being institutionally the strongest and institutionally the nearest to the government sector in terms of helping us out in various research programs and also building ideas, we should also contribute to this in a big way, in a sound manner, and help us practically giving me an outcome-based approach in terms of setting up a sustainable finance mechanism in India. And I would congratulate all of you who are present, and without taking more time, I would declare the webinar to start with the panel on mobilizing green finance for enhanced ambition. Thank you very much. Dr. Mathur, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohapatra. I want to thank you for your address and particularly for the sustainable finance mechanism that you spoke about. I think that would be a key thing. And I completely take your point. We are today talking about strengthening the green financial system in the country. I think that your many pieces of advice, both on mobilizing finance as well as on strengthening the green financial system, would provide the focus of discussions in the subsequent sessions. So many thanks. Annapurna, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathur. And this was a great start for the second webinar that we've held. And the last one yesterday was on the future of e-mobility in India, particularly focusing on specific strategies to demand. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohapatra, and welcome Natalie again. And we very much are so glad that we are able to host the series of 4 discussions, one after the other, on the COP themes as part of the strategic partnership that we have with the British High Commission. To ensure that we make best use of the time, because we are delighted to have extremely good set of speakers on today's agenda, and we look forward to some stimulating discussions. May I hand over the floor to Ms. Natalie Toms, Economic Council of British High Commission, who will be moderating the panel 1, which is Mobilizing Green Finance for Enhanced Ambition. Before that, I think, Natalie, over to you, and you would be conducting a poll before we move on to the discussions. Natalie?
You are muted, Natalie. Please unmute. Natalie, please repeat and unmute yourself first.
Yes. We still can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you, Dr. Malhotra. Sorry, I was having issues with my written there. Although I was just saying, actually, I'm not sure I have the technology available to carry out the poll. I don't know whether Dr. Annapurna, you might be able to poll. How do I do that on WebEx?
Oh, well, the poll, yes. May I request the poll to be given? And can I request all the audience to, the poll is to also take part. The poll is available on your chat right now. The time has started. Please select your answer and click on the submit button. You've got time. You've got 1 minute for it.
And you'll be able to tell us the answer to this afterwards, Annapurna.
Yes, so you would get the answer to the. So we are requesting, we have still time. Please, if you haven't polled, do poll right now and submit your answer. Don't forget to submit your answer. It is on the chat box. The response should come anytime now, Natalie, for you. I think the poll has ended and we should get the response now. Okay. So Natalie, for your sake, we have a large number saying 50%.
No answer takes the cake.
True. I don't think
it's more than the number of people who answer.
That's because they don't click the submit button, I think.
Okay.
So are they correct? So yes.
Okay, so what is the correct answer?
I'm going to test my maths to convert them, but I think basically about 40% of people have said 25%, 40% have said 50%, and a few have said 70 or 85%. So it's kind of between 25 and 50% is where our audience is making the guess. Annapurna, which of these are correct, or is it the even higher number?
%85% is the correct answer.
Oh wow! Gosh, so
85% was domestic. That's pretty good.
Very good. Yes.
Okay.
That's excellent. I'll remember that.
Okay, all yours now, Natalie.
Super. And okay, great. So it's fantastic to now be moving on to our first panel session today on mobilizing green finance for enhanced ambition. As Dr. Malhotra has just said, with India's huge infrastructure pipeline, mobilizing finance here as well as in other developing countries is going to be crucial. And I have the perfect panel to discuss how we get those finances flowing. First of all, here today I have Darshan Wignaraja, who leads the team in London, which is responsible for the COP26 finance campaign. It's his job to make sure that it all comes together in Glasgow next year. So he's the perfect person to have here. And second, equally perfect, Abhishek Acharya, Joint Director in the Climate Change Finance Unit in the DEA here in India, who Dr. Mohapatra just mentioned. Mr. Acharya leads on policy on looking at climate finance issues. Then next, we have Prasad Kakari, who is the Executive Director and Strategy Officer of the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund. He makes investments in Indian infrastructure, but also draws in that foreign investment in order to do so as well. And dare I say it again, one of the collaborations which the UK has with the Indian government is through the NIIF in our Green Growth Equity Fund. Next, we also have Pankaj Sindwani, the Chief Business Officer of Tata Cleantech, a partnership between Tata Capital and the IFC. Tata Cleantech is the first private sector company globally to partner with the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, in developing the solar rooftop market here in India. So Mr. Sindwani is responsible for crores and crores of investment in green projects here. And then finally, we have Nadia Rashid, the Deputy Res Rep for the United Nations Development Programme. As Dr. Mohapatra just mentioned, the UNDP are working closely with the DEA on a sustainable finance collaboration, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that today as well. As the panel goes on, please do put your questions in the Q&A. And at some point, I will hopefully be able to read out from those and ask our panel some of your questions as well. But in the first instance, I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to make opening remarks on the theme. What do you think are the opportunities and challenges for mobilizing private finance at scale for climate action here in India and in other developing countries? And can I go first of all to Darshan on that?
Great, thanks. Natalie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, that's very reassuring. And I would like to start by thanking all of those who have organised this outstanding panel. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you to all of the doctors for their introductory comments. I thought they were very helpful and sketched the landscape really well. Let me try and be relatively brief because I know you have a number of people talking on the panel. So we're trying to do a couple of things for the finance campaign ahead of COP26. Number one, and primarily, I would say we are trying to ensure that the public finance commitments that were made in Paris, chiefly by those who are providing donor finance, are met as per the agreement in 2015. That is undoubtedly the key to ensuring that we have a trust base from which we can operate going into the run-up for next November. That's the first piece. It's also critical because of the role of public finance, as has been touched on in the introduction. Public finance does things that private finance cannot do, and it takes on risks which private finance would never be comfortable taking in an initial period, but allows the development of new markets, the testing of new technology, and actually it allows penetration into regions and locations which would otherwise not be the foremost to attract private capital. Secondly, linked obviously is the importance of mobilizing private finance at scale. The phrase billions to trillions has now been in the development / climate finance space for a couple of years. That is certainly the core of what is the aspiration here. And what we're seeing in the last 2 years, last 6 months, and actually over the last 8 weeks is an acceleration across a number of private finance institutions and some policymakers to ensure that all the ingredients are right to transition towards our third aim in the campaign, which is to place climate at the core of all financial decision making, be that public or private. Those are the 3 aims of the finance campaign. It is one, as you said, Natalie, of 5 campaigns, which sits alongside the core negotiations work and the operation. To answer your question specifically, these are my thoughts initially on mobilizing private finance. Crucially, the markets are different for mitigation and adaptation. I think we have to be realistic about the role that public finance can play, particularly in mitigation. Much of the scale opportunities exist in the mitigation space, but we must work hard to understand whether there's the opportunity to leverage much greater volumes into adaptation. The real conundrum is, how do we do this at scale? There are a number of $500 million, potentially $1 billion funds which are in the region of drawing in institutional investors, but they have not yet made the leap across to unlocking institutional investment at scale. There are distinctions to be made between what can we do internationally versus what happens domestically. I'm very proud to say that, having read is correct, the core response can be really focused around what domestically can be unlocked, and then what can appear from an international context can be a supplement, unless it's public finance, which can again take off and address some of the risks. And I think we get into that in some of your later questions. I think there's some complexities around cost of capital, particularly in countries including India, as well as complexity around the type of finance instruments and the type of categories, be it debt, equity, mezzanine finance, which are most appropriate for unlocking capital into certain sectors and certain technologies. And that's true across renewable energies, environmental technologies, and some of the increasing efficiency opportunities that we're seeing. Natalie, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Darshan. That was super. And now going over to Mr. Acharya at the Department of Economic Affairs. Would you like to make your opening remarks?
Thank you, Natalie. And first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Mathur and also to Additional Secretary Dr. Mahapatra sir for enunciating the broad understanding of the sustainable finance. I deal with the issue of climate finance within Department of Economic Affairs, and we handle the climate finance negotiations under the UNFCCC. So let me start off by clearing up the understanding that climate finance and green finance are two different issues. And as mandated by the Article 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5 of the UNFCCC, the provision of climate finance is from the developed countries to the developing country parties. And also the adequacy, credibility, and the predictability of climate finance for the developing country parties holds a key role in successful implementation of the climate actions by the developing country parties. And India, of course, emphasizes a very serious discourse in the international public climate finance, in particularly raising up the scope, scale, and speed of the finance required. Now, if I understand correctly, as this webinar is a part of the webinar series of COP26, in my understanding, the issue of green finance is not even a mandated item within the finance negotiations, whereas the climate finance is. And the discussions and the negotiations going under climate finance are extremely important from India's point of view, because as the Article 4.7 of the UNFCCC states, that the extent to which the developing country parties will effectively implement their climate actions will be dependent on the scaled up provision of climate finances. One of the most important issues on the climate finance angle that I like to highlight is about the $100 billion goal per year that was taken up in the Copenhagen and followed up in Cancun, which was supposed to be by 2020, but we have a very differing opinion on the assessment of this $100 billion a year. And it is very much necessary to have a clear idea where exactly we stand on these mobilization goals. And we highlight that a proper assessment of the numbers by the UNFCCC is therefore a prerequisite along with the linking of gap in the fulfillment of the developed country parties' commitments to the new collective and quantified finance goals, which will be coming under the Paris Agreement. Let me also indicate that, well, with the current reality of the pandemic situation, all of our economies have been battered by this pandemic, and we are facing new sorts of crises within our economy, apart from the global climate crisis that we have been facing, obviously. We, from India, we are committed to our climate action, but how we do it is dependent on the finances, and the ambitious climate action in developing countries is dependent on the ambitious support from the developed country parties. For us, the climate action is all-encompassing. It covers mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, response, measures, as well as means of implementation like finance, technology, and capacity building. So the basic tenet of equity and the CBDRRC are the prerequisite, and there is a high requirement of scaling up the scope, scale, and speed of the climate finance for the developing country parties to enact their climate action. I'd like to stop here for the moment. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. And moving next to opening remarks from Mr. Gadkari of the NIIF.
Thank you, Natalie, and a good afternoon to all of you at the event. And thank you for inviting very topical and a timely event. What I would like to do probably in the opening remarks is really maybe take 30 seconds to explain a little bit about the NIIF model, because in that itself are, I believe, some of the answers which we are seeking, and I'll talk about that later as we go along. Might be aware of the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. It's essentially a fund manager which has been anchored by the government of India. Anchor the fund in collaboration and partnership with very large global and domestic investors. I'm sorry, there is some echo from somewhere. So the way the model has panned out is the government of India has put in anchor capital. First onboarded domestic investors, which were really HDFC, Kotak, ICICI, and Axis. These were some of the initial investors into the NIIF funds. That was followed by the multilateral institutions. So we had institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, which came in with their investments. That was then followed by sovereign wealth funds. So we have people like Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Temasek of Singapore, who have come in as investors. And then subsequently came the pension, and these are the large global pension funds. So whether the Canadian pension funds like CPPIB, Ontario Teachers, Australian Super, and so that is how this whole institution has got formed. And we are still in the journey of fundraise. We have reached a number of about 4.5 billion roughly dollars that we manage at the moment, and the journey is to reach an initial target of about $6 billion across all of these investors. I mean, and as you can see, these are a diverse kind of investors from various places, continents, and all of that. But one thing and one common theme which has stood out is really this theme around sustainability, climate mitigation, ESG, and so on. So I think this has been which has resonated across every investor category. So much so that there are some investors who have also explicitly said that we would not like to invest in businesses which are linked to, say, coal or thermal power and so on and so forth. So that is the extent to which some of the investors take this whole theme very seriously. And so coming back, so clearly, I think the opportunities, the need is there, as well as I think the opportunity is massive. As Dr. Mahapatra in his opening address outlined, the government of India itself has catalyzed and channeled or created several programs within this space. The renewable energy target has already been enhanced to 450 gigawatts. Probably they could take it even higher. So massive opportunities within the renewable energy space. There are other kinds of areas which are as big and as important. And in fact, in my mind, I sometimes debate. They are definitely opportunities, but at times some of them also you can when we discuss challenges. I would also like to focus our minds when challenges about climate financing or green financing from structural issues. We have been able to attract, and my focus, really, my comments will be mainly from a private capital perspective or a private financier perspective. And we have been very successful in getting private capital into renewable energy, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, and and hydro, as well as now power. I think we have to make as much endeavor to get private capital into other aspects of this whole sustainability theme, whether it's water, whether it's battery technologies, whether it's EV charging infrastructure. The challenges are around that. How do we create the right models, right structures, right instruments, which can enable us to attract capital into these new emerging areas as well? I will take a pause here and we'll touch upon some of the themes in later on questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. A lot of interesting points there, which we'll pick up again on later. But next, I will go to Mr. Sindwani of Tata Clean Tech, and ask for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Thank you, Terry and the British High Commission for having organized this. This is, as Prasad earlier said, this is such a topical and timely topic to discuss. Going back to the poll that was conducted just a few moments back, my impression is that as Indians, we tend to oscillate between blinding hope and crushing despair. So despite we doing 85% and above, the overarching impression was that, it is less than 25%. Coming back to, the whole public finance, let me first begin with a brief introduction of Tata Clean Tech. So Tata Clean Tech, as you'd also initially said in your remarks, is a joint venture between IFC and Tata Capital. What is remarkable is that this pretty much started as an experiment many years back in 2013. We were probably the first private sector entity in India to specifically focus on climate finance. And I must say, last 7 years have been extremely enriching, extremely rewarding in many ways. We are India's first private sector green bank as well. And, when it comes to mobilizing private finance, when it comes to blended finance, we have had the opportunity to experiment with some of these models and have had some initial success with some of these also. I'll speak about these in my remarks as I take the discussion forward. So coming to climate finance, in my personal opinion, needs to be bucketed in two, and it needs to be seen in two distinct buckets. One is public finance and private finance, and what is needed for public finance probably is very different from what is needed for private finance. And public finance is scarce. We all are aware that public finance is scarce, and therefore, what kind of public finance instrument should we really have? Should it be in form of pure grants? Should it be in form of plain vanilla loans? Should be it in form of blended finance? Should it be in form of the first loss guarantees? What should be the form of public sector finance, and what are those ways and means that you could intermediate that? That's question one. Question two is private finance. How do you mobilize private finance? And my sense, for you to mobilize private finance, and India has demonstrated its ability to raise private finance so successfully, and there are so many examples. In solar and wind alone, I think we've mobilized more than 100 billion, and most of it has come through private finance. So first and foremost, you need ambition, you need vision, right? So you need scale. For anyone to sit up and take notice, I think it is extremely important that the governments are proactive with what the long-term vision is likely to be, what the long-term ambition is likely to be. When government announced 175 gigawatt, that is what exactly it did. 100 gigawatts solar would excite just about everyone: international investors, international technology players, Indian private sector operators, and so on and so forth. So number one is scale. The second extremely important part is sustainable, stable policy framework. any investor can come to India, but they would want their investments to be safe. I think return is secondary. We have classes of investors who would be willing to work with relatively lower rate of return also, but they want to see their investments being safe. So therefore, a viable, sustainable policy framework is extremely important, and thereafter, contract enforceability. That is equally important. Where once the contract has been signed, there is this sanctity about the contract, and thereafter nobody reneges on that. If these 2 or 3 things are taken care of, given the other advantages that we have a very strong, resilient economy, COVID notwithstanding. We have very robust judicial system, and we have demand which is going to sustain for many, many decades. So I think there is no other reason why India will not continue to attract a lot of private capital. But I think for private capital to come in, these things are very important. Now, going back to public finance, I think that role is extremely important, specifically for those sectors where we are still scratching the surface. And unfortunately, we often conflate green finance with renewable energy finance. I think green finance is much more than renewable energy finance. And much of the investment which has happened in India also is largely in the area of renewable energy. And to be honest, that area is anyway witnessing a lot of private investment. And if you ask me today as a lender, I can tell you too much money is chasing too few projects. In fact, spreads have come down to a great extent. So utility scale solar, utility scale wind, I don't think there is so much of a problem as far as finance is concerned. Public finance is needed for emerging sectors, for sectors which are yet not mainstream. These could be water, these could be e-mobility, these could be green logistics, this could be green warehousing. And each one of these sectors would require that initial nudge, initial push. And I must also say at the same time that this initial push also should be time bound, because eventually in long term, what will work is again the same thing: scale, long-term policy framework, the right kind of business models. So unless we have the right kind of business models, the right kind of policy framework and the scale, public finance, unfortunately, will not be able to sustain this for eternity, right? Eventually, private finance will need to replace public finance. And therefore, it is important that we understand the limitations and scarce nature of public finance available. India, and again, coming back to example of Tata Cleantech, I don't think we need too much of global capital in grants or in concessional finance also. As experiment after experiment has demonstrated, Indian projects, Indian developers have offered very good returns to investors, both domestic and global. So what you need is, access to large pools of capital, and not necessarily huge degree of concessional finance. As I said, of course, you'll need concessional finance for some sectors, but you need access to a very large pool of finance. This is returnable money. This is something which can go back with reasonable returns. I'm not saying very high returns. Looking at the problem that we are solving for the entire world, India has the capability to return that capital with reasonable returns. So I think I'll pause here with some of these my initial comments. And if there are further questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. It's a really strong point about the need for policy vision, which is something we've seen really clearly with the 450 gigawatt target. But interesting to hear from yourself and also Mr. Gadkari about the importance of emerging sectors as well, which we can return to that. But before then, it would be great to hear from the multilateral perspective. So over to Nadia for your opening remarks from UNDP.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And let me also add my thanks to Terry and to the British High Commission for convening these important dialogues. It was also really wonderful to listen to both Dr. Mathur and to Dr. Mohapatra to giving their introductions. UNDP, as you know, is the UN's development program. And for us, of course, one of our key areas of focus is to promote integrated solutions to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And we recognize that achieving the goals really means considerably scaling up financing to achieve the SDGs. And that, of course, includes green finance. So we do this by working with partners in government, private sector, and others to work on enabling conducive policy ecosystems, designing innovative financial instruments, working to attract new sources of capital, and also helping to develop impact measurement metrics. Recognizing, as we've been discussing, that we have really just less than a decade to achieve the commitments that were made on the SDGs, and given the unfortunate setbacks that we're seeing around the world, quite devastating setbacks with the impact of COVID, prioritizing scaling up of financing, and particularly green financing, is absolutely crucial, as is accelerating our efforts on climate change and addressing environmental degradation. So in terms of your question, Natalie, in terms of looking at some of the key barriers that we see in mobilizing green financing, one of the issues that often comes up is that there is lack of a common definition when it comes to discussing green finance, and also a lack of standardized frameworks to be able to evaluate capital flows towards green sectors. And in India, although there's been some good progress, and the Securities and Exchange Board of India has developed guidelines for green bonds, which really provide a very useful framework, we see that there is really a need to work towards a common definition and towards standardized frameworks, and that these could help to reduce some of the uncertainty that there is in the market, and really help to more effectively mobilize green capital. Several of the fellow panelists have already mentioned that there's a very strong focus on the renewable energy sector in India, and that there's really a need to expand investments in other key green sectors, including waste management, water conservation, pollution mitigation, and circular economy. And having an accepted definition could really help to attract investments to other sectors, to attract both domestic and foreign investments. So this is something that for us is a priority to work on and to support the government with. And coming to opportunities, as Dr. Mohapatra has said, the government has really made a lot of progress on many fronts, and we're seeing that there's very strong examples emerging, particularly on renewable energy. So we see that these are important steps to addressing the barriers that exist. And as Dr. Mohapatra mentioned, we have been working with the Ministry of Finance and the Department of Economic Affairs in particular on supporting a sustainable finance collaborative. And this process brought together leaders from a range of institutions to look at pathways for growing sustainable finance in India. And a key recommendation that emerged from this collaborative was the need to develop a green taxonomy to provide clarity around the economic activities that can be considered green and really contribute meaningfully to India's environmental targets. And also to really provide a common language to evaluate deals, to help develop pipelines for green projects that are attractive to investors, and also to help align financial disclosures to enable better tracking, and also to assess gaps and ways in which to close that gaps. So maybe I'll just conclude by saying, this kind of taxonomy and working towards this approach could really help in expanding the types of investments across green sectors and initiatives.
Great, thank you very much. Those are really interesting remarks. I think the importance of taxonomies and frameworks is a really big point. And actually, hopefully, there'll be further discussion of that in the second session as well. If you don't mind, I might go straight back to you, Nadia, for my next question. And so you talked about kind of frameworks and taxonomies. Do you have a view on the role that financial mechanisms can play as well? Things like instruments for hedging currency risk, blended finance vehicles, Do you think, for drawing that private finance, maybe using public finance to draw that private finance in?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it is important that we look at both the types of instruments and the types of policy frameworks that can support greater investments. And these are, these kinds of instruments are particularly critical in developing countries, of course. For us, what we've been also looking at is how we can support innovative mechanisms and blended finance vehicles that have oh, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little bit feedback. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I could hear you well.
Okay, good. So we've also been exploring innovative mechanisms and blended finance vehicles that have a potential in mitigating challenges such as, let's say, currency risks or unfavorable risk returns. And of course, by looking at ways of blending public and private capital, we can also create better incentives for private investors to invest in climate sensitive projects and in green projects. But what we've seen is that, of course, with innovative financial instruments, often we do require significant technical support for their development, and particularly when looking at new sectors. So there's considerable time that's needed to ensure proper legal structuring, to conduct baseline assessments, and to generate interest among multiple parties. So there is a lot of potential there, but it does require also, I think, collaboration and an effort, and particularly a strong initial investment to create a conducive environment. So one of the things we've been doing is working with a number of partners. We established last year an SDG finance facility, also working with Niti Aayog to launch that. And the idea of this finance facility is to forge partnerships with a number of key stakeholders to actually help design blended and innovative financial instruments. So we're looking at, for example, green municipal bond issuances, green outcome-based funds, impact bonds, and guarantee models. And one of the things we're also doing through the facility is producing a report on the potential for blended finance to support COVID recovery, as an example, given the impacts that we're witnessing, and really laying out key opportunities and barriers for blending capital in India and for financing recovery, initially looking particularly at the MSME and agricultural sectors. But this is just one example of the way in which we are addressing these issues.
Great. They sound like really exciting projects. Thank you very much. And it feels like a theme to me, which is definitely emerging from the session so far, is of the role of public finance and of private finance, but particularly of public finance in capital in mobilizing private investment into these newer sectors, and the way in which we can do that. I think turning back to our government representatives, at Darshan, can I ask for your thoughts on how, the best way in which we can use public funds to channel those private sector flows into green finance in India and elsewhere? Oh, if he can hear me.
I can hear you. Could you hear?
Oh, great. Oh, yes, I can. Yes, brilliant.
Excellent. So it's been a really fabulous discussion so far. Can I just respond on a couple of things? One, very much from a COP presidency perspective, or just to acknowledge the comments from the Ministry of Finance. Very much the case that there is a distinction between climate finance and green finance, particularly within a UNFCCC context. As the UK, we are doubling our climate finance, moving into the next period. We agree that multi-year credibility is vital to those aspects of the negotiation and is foundational for the Paris Agreement. So just to acknowledge those. Then to answer your question and to maybe pull together one or two thoughts from both Mr. Sindwani and Mr. Gadkari. Very much, we must be very targeted about how we use concessionality, be that international concessionality or domestic concessionality. And I very much support the comments on the importance of the temporal nature of subsidy, so that it is clear to the market when we are using concessionality that this is for a limited time period, and it is allowing the private sector or private capital to build familiarity, to understand better how a market could function, or to develop new markets which don't exist. And I think it's very true that we're already seeing, and have for a number of years across a number of countries, competition in terms of capital availability. And I wholly agree that sometimes the supply of capital is not the issue. So it is important to be nuanced about where across the spectrum, be it in environmental technologies or in resource efficiency sectors, we are focusing where in areas like renewable energy, where we're seeing cost curves come down in an accelerated fashion, we don't use precious resources where private capital is willing to wear some of that risk. And there is indeed different categories which will take on and look for different levels of return, be it private equity or certain corporate bonds. And it is great to see India's progress across the green bond market. Really, the design of the ones for the next generation are critical. So learning the lessons that we are already through the National Infrastructure Investment Fund, and particularly the green growth equity element of it. What does it take to bring on institutional investors, and where are their blockers? Are we able to aggregate projects? Are we able to give certainty across the offtake value chain, and is that supported by the policy framework? Those are all things that we are seeking to try and reinforce here in the UK as well. And the Prime Minister has recently announced a greater focus on offshore wind, as well as bringing forward the end of the internal combustion engine production a decade to 2030. Well, how do we ideally define the public instrument? I'll stop there. Natalie, I hope I didn't break up at the end there.
No, thank you very much. And handing back over to the Ministry of Finance and Mr. Acharya, be interesting to hear your reactions to anything that the panelists have said, but also in particular on this point about how we can use public finance to best effect to crowd in that private sector investment as well in India. I know yourself and Dr. Mohapatra have been doing with the UNDP.
Thank you, Natalie. I would like to highlight a couple of points that are very important in my opinion. First of all, the importance of the public finance. Now, the climate actions are based on two main actionable points. One is adaptation, another is mitigation. It is very much clear, and we have seen from our experiences, that the private sector financial flows in the adaptation are very, very limited because there is no profitability or return, assured return in those sectors. Therefore, Government of India has been always proactively taking actions on the adaptation from the domestic resources. Therefore, the international public finance as a commitment towards the developing country parties has to take into account these actions, as well as it has to accept the reality that adaptation needs public finances. Secondly, there is, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Secondly, there is the issue of grants. As all therefore, the developed country parties have to take into account the full incremental costs of the climate action taken by the developing country parties, which requires the importance of grants as well as the international finance flows with the grant equivalence or the concessionality. Therefore, these two aspects need to be highlighted and need to be understood very clearly if we are going to talk about climate finances. So thank you for my time.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, my computer broke up a bit there, but I very much hope the other panelists heard everything you said. I think your point about adaptation is really important. And I know the Prime Minister has launched the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is going to make a significant impact on this front, which the UK is really pleased to be working with the Indian government. Sorry, I'm conscious we're already slightly running out of time, but I'd like to turn back to the private sector. And in particular, it would be good to know, maybe for Mr. Gadkari initially, what do you see the role of the financial sector and international funds, and how have you attracted those funds into your investments, and what examples of success do you have?
Sure. So essentially, I think I want to give two examples within and the word I will highlight is what I used in my first opening remarks is really collaboration. I think the name of the game in these things is how can you collaborate and therefore multiply your resources, because are scarce. That's the essence of all our discussions, right? And how do you make every dollar work far more, far higher, and to a far greater degree? And really, the first example is again with I think it's a great example of collaboration between the Government of India and UK through our respective organizations, which was really the NIIF as well as DFID on the side of UK. And for those of you who might be aware of this example, so about 2 years back, our respective countries came together and announced a possible platform or a fund management platform to give a fillip to investments in sustainability and green and energy, rather sustainability space. And that's how this Green Growth Equity Fund was born. So it's essentially the original joint venture is between NIIF and DFID, which contributed about $175 million each, if I'm not mistaken. So that's initially about $350 million, which was put together. And the idea is that this is a private equity fund, which means it is a fund which is to take a risk. It is going to take a bet in various sectors across technologies, across business models, and therefore invest equity capital, which is a purely based model. And the idea is to multiply this capital by raising further money through equity and debt sources. So today itself, I think we have crossed probably 400 odd million dollars. I think their target is somewhere between $500 to $600 million is what the Green Growth Equity Fund is targeting to reach. They have been able to onboard other investors. So one of the leading investors I can recollect is BP. BP has come in as a separate investor into it. And the way this was orchestrated was we actually chose a separate fund manager, which is a company Eversource, which again happens to be a joint venture between an Indian company called Everstone and Lightsource BP from UK. So that's a Indo-UK collaboration over there. So Eversource is really the fund manager, which is managing this fund. And then they have onboarded, as I said, BP as one more investor, and they are, I know, in advanced dialogue, a couple of more investors to onboard into the fund. Our reckoning is that eventually the initial $50 million, which has come from our side, we believe it is likely to catalyze investments to the give and take order of I would say $3 to $3.5 billion, which is a multiple of almost a 20 on the initial dollar which we have invested. And this multiplication happens because of getting India and UK governments together, then getting other contributions from both Everstone and Lightsource BP, and then getting in newer investors like BP and others. And then further, most of what this doing is it is setting up platform companies in each of the areas which are important for the country. So they already have a platform company on the renewable energy space. They have a platform company on the distributed energy space. They have a platform company on electric vehicles. There is a company on waste management, and then there are a couple of more coming down the line. And each of these companies will have partnerships, will have debt financing, and that's how the multiple of 20 times happens. So I think this is probably one interesting example which has happened in the climate financing space, and I think eminently replicable. A similar model we have tried to do, obviously at a much in a different league, is a partnership with the Indian public sector entity for taking on really the ambit of energy efficiency. So we have set a company called Energy for smart metering in a joint venture with a company called Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which is a public sector owned by the government of India. So NIF and ESL have come together to set up a company which is going to do smart metering projects across the country. Natalie, I'll just stop here, but these are the kind of examples, and we think these are some of the models which could be looked at for replication.
Thank you very much. They sound a lot of exciting examples there. Thank you. And then moving finally to Mr. Sinwani, and I'd just like to ask you maybe some questions about market conditions as an investor. I think you mentioned earlier that over the last few months, even as we've been going through this terrible crisis, there's been a huge kind of surge of investment in many renewables projects. I'm kind of interested in if you could go into a bit more detail of your understanding of the market and the effect which this year's kind of economic crisis has had, and how you see us building back better, as Dr. Mohapatra said.
Absolutely. So, but let me first fully agree with Abhishek that the role of public finance and grants in particular when it comes to adaptation is so very, very important. There is no denying that. So I fully agree with him there. We were basically in private sector, we largely deal with mitigation, and therefore the role of public finance may not be as pronounced, although in some of these sectors it may be as important. Now, coming back to your question, I think there the primary reason why too much money has been chasing the renewable energy projects is because of the strong push that the government has had towards renewables. In fact, if you look at few sectors which have been very, very resilient during COVID times, it is because of Government of India's push. In fact, Government of India came up with 90,000 crore package during this pandemic. This was routed through power finance corporations to all of these discoms. So I think this explicit support of government behind renewables, and renewables in India is a must-run status anyway. So these are two or three reasons, and plus, the innovations in the bits as it is. For example, we've come up with bits with storage. So a lot of new bits have come up, and which has kept people excited. People are aware of the long-term policy horizon, and that is the reason. And of course, there are other things which have also worked because of so much of liquidity being there in the market. Banks are also far more amenable to lending some of these projects. But I think even in the long term, utility scale solar, utility scale wind will continue to attract a lot of money. I don't think there is any doubt about this. We secured 100 million line from Green Climate Fund for developing rooftop solar market in India. We are also in discussions with, incidentally, another UK DFI to develop similarly e-mobility market in the e-mobility energy efficiency market in India. So here again, much like what Prasad earlier said, it is a question of collaboration, and I think we are trying to position Tata Cleantech as a platform to invest some of this global money into Indian projects, because in the last 7 years we've been able to create the kind of domain expertise, the understanding of nuances of Indian project finance business, so that the global money can find the right use in Indian projects in terms of investments, both in equity and in debt. And I can tell you, despite the usual understanding that development finance is usually either subscale or it doesn't generate enough returns, year over year we have returned fabulous returns. I mean, our returns are in the excess of 13%, 14%. You can imagine this is good to do, and at the same time makes strong commercial sense. So I think this is one example which can be followed by many other financial institutions also, because in our history of last 7 years, we've not had many non-performing assets, and we've returned great returns to our shareholders, and that too operating only in climate finance. So I think this is something which could probably work as a model for other financial institutions also. And we are already working with some of those, not just in India, elsewhere also, to see how this model could be adapted elsewhere as well. Because we ourselves started an experiment, as I said earlier on, 7 years back. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and what a positive note to end on. I'm afraid we've slightly run out of time, so I can't take any of the questions from the floor. I'm sorry about that. But I just want to say again a huge thank you to the panelists. I found that an incredibly fascinating and in-depth discussion, which drew on a number of different themes. I mean, in summary, I thought the thing which really came out today was the diversity of different projects and different investment mechanisms, which we should all be looking at as we look ahead to COP26. I mean, the importance of public finance, especially for adaptation, and but also the role of public finance in supporting private investment into those new and emerging sectors in particular. And it was great to hear some of the particular ideas from Tata Cleantech, from the NAAF and the UNDP about how we can or how we're all going about this. So thank you all again very much. Appreciate it, and looking forward to the next session.
Thank you, everyone.
Laguna, I think you're mute. Still mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're audible now.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry for the technical glitch, But Natalie, if you are still here, thank you very much for such a lovely session, and every word that was spoken in the session was encouraging. Before we move on to the next panel, which is transitioning to a green financial system in India, we have a poll. Can I request the poll to come on the chat section of your screens? Well, for people who are on the phone, the question is on your screen now, which is which source contributes to the highest amount of green investment in India? Is it commercial banks, bilateral and multilateral development finance institutions, public sector undertakings, or government budgets? Please poll and submit your answers. We have 1 minute to submit. So click the right answer and submit. Okay, we do have, again, no answers. I think some of the people who are on their mobile are unable to submit their answer, but we have, for Mr. Rashmi sir, we have bilateral and multilateral being higher than, of course, the no answer. But the correct answer, which is a giveaway, which is quite different from the rest, is the commercial banks. So, Mr. Rashmi, for you to start the conversation, and may I now invite Mr. R.R. Rashmi to chair the session. But before he takes on the mic, I need to mention that he is a distinguished fellow at TERI, but he was a special secretary at the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, and India's principal negotiator on climate change for several years. Over to you, Mr. Rashmi.
Very much for this introduction. The result of the poll is really quite, something to take note of. People don't really attribute the success of the energy transition and the work that we have done in the field of climate change in India. They don't attribute it to the commercial system at the moment, it seems. So this is, of course, and pointed to the system that we have today and what we need to do. The subject which we are going to discuss today in this session is that of how we can green the financial system. And Mr. Mohapatra, in his opening remarks, cautioned us that we should talk about strengthening the financial system in India. And a lot of efforts have already been made to make transition towards greening the system, and the time has now come to strengthen these efforts. At the international level, and there is a lot of work being done. The leading global financial actors have begun to take proactive steps to align their investments in a manner that their investments move towards greener and more sustainable financial projects. At the national level, what is distinctive, and something which has been noted by several speakers earlier, is that India has experimented with concessional finance through the commercial financing banking system, and the green bonds have become very popular. India is one of the leading countries which is now accessing the capital market with the help of the green bonds. But what needs to be done in our march towards a low carbon economy is to further accelerate these sustainable investments. What is it that the financial system can do to transform itself and make this acceleration of this process of sustainable finance easier and more accessible to the players in the financial system? Mr. Mohapatra referred to the IPSF, where they have made a reference to the use of disclosures or taxonomy or innovative financial products, which can be used by the financial system, and then we can then perhaps move to a situation where larger equity finance begins to flow in. Debt finance is easy, and we, as Mr. Sandwani was pointing out, the economic system has now matured enough to be able to drive green finance in those areas where economics plays a role. But still, there are a number of areas where equity finance is not moving on its own. So policy framework may be needed, certain different kinds of policy push and regulatory measures might be needed. So we have a very distinguished panel to discuss these issues with us today. I have with me Yasmin Mozina, who is the Deputy Director and Head of the Private Finance at UK Treasury. She has earlier worked with UK Financial Investment, and also currently she's working with Mike Carney, who is UK Prime Minister's financial advisor for COP26. So welcome, Yasmin. The second panelist which we have today is Mr. Amit Rama. He is Senior Vice President of the UK Climate Investments, who is leading its asset management activities in India. He has a long experience across energy and other related sectors. Earlier, he was with the UK Green Investment Group, so he brings a very rich experience of investment banking. Welcome, Mr. Amit Rama. I have with me Mr. Sanjeev Singhal, who is a very renowned person in the field of accountancy. He is a member of the Central Council of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and he is currently chairing the Sustainable Accounting Standards of the ICAI. So welcome, Mr. Singhal, for this discussion. I have also Mr. Abhinay Jaiswal, who is the Deputy General Manager and Head of the Project Finance Cell of the State Bank of India, the largest commercial bank in India. He brings, again, a very rich experience of over 15 years in dealing with very high value credit. And he has dealt with financing of several sectors, including power, renewables, discoms, fertilizers, and whatnot. So with this very experienced and panelist group of people who are going to speak on our panel today, we will be addressing some of the key questions in the field of strengthening the financial system in India for accelerating sustainable finance. Let me first turn towards Yasmin and request her to make her opening remarks. Let me point out here, since we have lost some of the time in the first session, I would request them to be brief in their opening remarks so that we can address them specific questions when we open the discussion for the floor. Yasmin, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will keep my remarks brief, but I think it's worth just introducing a bit more who I am and what we are doing. So the COP26 Private Finance Hub is the unit which is led by Mark Carney in his capacity as the UN Special Envoy and for climate finance, and also the finance advisor to the Prime Minister for COP26. Our focus is on building a system that mobilizes private finance to support the re-engineering of our economies for net zero. And our objective for the private finance work, which is the subject of this panel today as well, is very simple. It's to ensure that every professional financial decision takes climate change into account. This requires the right framework for the financial sector to be able to allocate capital, to manage the risks and seize the opportunities in this transition to net zero. So what we do is work with the private sector as well as other stakeholders to develop a framework, which Mark refers to as the 3 R's and 1 M. The first R is reporting. We are looking to improve the quantity, quality, and comparability of climate-related disclosures by implementing a common framework built on the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure recommendations. The second R is for risk management. And in this space, we are looking to ensure that the financial sector can measure and manage climate-related financial risks. As Mark likes to say, you can only manage what you can measure. The third R stands for returns. This is the work that we're doing to help investors identify the opportunities in the transition to net zero, as well as the risks, and be able to report on how their own portfolios are aligned for the transition across the whole economy to net zero. The final area is the M, which stands for mobilization. This is about increasing private financial flows to emerging and developing economies. And for us, that means looking to connect available capital with investable projects and to encourage new market structures. So that's the focus of what we do working with Mark Carney. But of course, the context of this agenda is not just COP, but it's also the reality of society placing a greater value on resilience and sustainability, which we've been seeing sharpened over the past year of the COVID pandemic crisis. We've seen interest in environmentally sustainable investment growing globally as international investors, including those in the UK, are putting climate change concerns at the heart of their investment processes. So combined with action at the national level, for example, we're now at 126 governments who have committed to net zero targets, robust climate risk management practices, and standardized disclosure guidelines, but critically, which are in line with those that are globally accepted as best practice, are key to providing the answers for investors, for allowing them to understand the risks and opportunities, and for supporting this whole economy transition to net zero. The UK has a wealth of expertise in internationalizing such efforts through multilateral initiatives like the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system, and of course the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, which just, I think about 3 weeks ago, the UK committed to mandating through the Prime Minister's 10-point plan Green Revolution announcement, the first major economy to do so. What's really important overall is to focus on global cooperation in areas like disclosure and taxonomies, which Mr. Rashmi referred to, and finding some degree of international coherence, while also making allowances for country specificities. The importance here is so that international investors, I think like many of you in this audience, can feel confident that you know what you're investing in. With that, I will stop my opening remarks and pass back to you, Mr. Chair.
I guess there is some connectivity problem with Mr. Rashmi.
Should I pass over to the next panelist? I think it's Mr. Amit Rama.
Yes, Mr. Amit Rama, could you? Yes,
sure.
We can't see you though. We can hear you.
I've had to log in from 2 devices because of IT issues. the voice will come
Please
from
go
a
ahead.
different. Yeah. So Amit Rama from UK Climate Investments. We are a joint venture between UK government and the Macquarie Group, where Macquarie is effectively the fund manager for a £200 million pool of capital, where UK government is the sole investor. And we are a minority equity investor in renewable energy and energy efficiency infrastructure in India and Africa. And we've invested approximately £80 million in India to date. My background is with the Green Investment Group, which UKCI continues to be a part of. And when Green Investment Group was set up in 2012, it was one of the pioneers of green reporting methodologies, particularly for mitigation-related projects. And we continue to let's say, play a leading role in contributing to the development of various standards here in the UK and international finance arena. And very excited to be on this panel to compare notes and with colleagues to learn more about the various activities undertaken to date, but also what can be done to mobilize more capital into this sector, particularly from the private sector. Thank you.
Mr. Rashmi, you're on mute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Annapurna. It seems I had lost the connection in between for a while, so I was only able to listen to the last words of Mr. Rama. So the next speaker we have today is Mr. Sanjeev Singhal. Over to you, Mr. Singhal, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, and a very good evening. As mentioned by Mr. Rashmi, I'm the chairperson of the first ever Sustainability Reporting Standard Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Institute of Chartered Accountants of India is a body consisting of 300,000 plus chartered accountant and 700,000 plus students. So this board was formed on 12th of February 2020 and is taking the initiatives on the Sustainable Development Goal and the related fields. We are also working on the Social Stock Exchange along with the Security Exchange Board of India and on the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal in the private sector with the Niti Aayog. And it's a regulatory body. The Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has been constituted under an Act of Parliament. There are various initiatives that we have taken. We are also coming out with an auditing standard on the greenhouse gas emissions, and we are also working on an auditing standard on the social audits. Green finance is the need of the hour because the top 5 risks that the world faces today are climate related: extreme weather, climate action failure, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, and human-made environmental disaster. And we have seen that what COVID-19 can do to the whole world. And the Indian green finance market is in early stage of development, though India is the second largest green bond market among emerging economies and has issued $7.2 billion of green bonds to date. But we believe that there is a high demand for the green bonds, and what is required is a consistency, a uniformity in the definition of what green finance is, and a particular scorecard, just like the financial institution work on a prime lending rate. So this prime lending rate could be much lower for the green finance, and it could be higher for the non-green finance, and then we can work out a scoring criteria, because what is important is an objectivity. It should not be green finance just for the sake of being green finance or just for the sake of meeting the targets. I believe that we should align everything to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And since Niti Aayog is publishing a dashboard for India as a whole for the achievement towards the Sustainable Development Goal, it will be good to develop a taxonomy of the green finance on the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals so that there is a standardization. And then, accordingly, incentives or disincentives can be given to the different sectors. So this is what I would like to say in the opening remarks. In the interest of time, I will not like to expand it further, and I'll be happy to take up when it comes to the panel questions. Thank you, Mr. Rashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Singhal, very much for your precision. Mr. Abhinay Jaswal is our next panelist. Let me invite him for his opening remarks.
Good evening, Mr. Rashmiji and all members. I'm audible?
Yes, you're audible.
As you have made an introduction, that I am looking after this project finance cells of State Bank of India, Delhi Center. Basically, what we are looking forward is the project financing, which are a greenfield projects and long gestation period. And out of that, the renewable energy is our focus area. And as was mentioned in the quiz earlier question, that commercial bank has been the leading, and out of that, State Bank has been the leading banker who have been providing to the renewable energy in India. And as of now, we are having around 600 projects, small, medium, rooftop, and all including, which are in the renewable energy. Portfolio of 25,000 crore. To share this data, the priority area for the State Bank of India. And recently, we have simplified our policy also in last year for the renewable financing extra in tune with the Government of India initiative. As that by 2022, it is the renewable energy is to be 175, and that is from 30 megawatt in solar, 13 gigawatt in solar to 100 gigawatt. For the government, solar is the priority. So is it with us also. So recently, we are looking forward to many projects as a bank at Delhi Center, at Mumbai Center, where 2 project finance cells are there. So we are going into a big way in the renewable financing. Especially, our experience has been much better with the solar projects, because whatever projections we have been making in the last 2-3 years and have been financing, we have found in tandem with the studies or data available with the similar had not been that much case with the wind also. Though this year there has been some reduction in air flow, unprecedented reduction in air flow. So it is causing some issues there. But overall, bank has been priority area for this, and we are also looking, as Mr. Sindwani has in the first panel discussed, that Tata Cleantech and all NBFCs have been very supportive initiative in the earlier years of the development of green financing. So we are also looking for providing refinancing to these projects, which are a bit costlier at that material time. So we are not only supporting the system in a capacity addition as a renewable, as well as renewable in both air, solar and wind both, but also in providing a affordable finance, refinance for those projects which have already been installed. But 1 or 2 issues have been there since SBI has been a little bit more aggressive in the recent years. I have found what I have studied in the market, the other market aggressive players are PFC, REC, and 1 or 2 public sector banks. Why? Until unless in Indian scenario, public sector banks take a massive role, supportive role in green financing, it will not be deeply penetrated, as well as it will not get the same momentum as desired by the 2022 targets or 25 targets or 2030 targets. So even our banking sector need to be more aggressive in this. But why many of the banks are not willing to? That needs to be looked into. There had been certain issues in the recent times. That is, had been a renegotiation of PPA. Renegotiation of PPA, especially in Andhra. Once a project has been commissioned with certain viability, if it gets renegotiated, then some company will not be able, because it is only very margin projects, and company will not be able to cover that up from that project. It may be possible company may have some strength in some other places, so they might be paying. They might be paying. Certainly, one or two projects we are financing in Andhra. Companies are the larger ones, so they are paying. So this is the issue. Why many of the banks have a bit resistance to get into this.
Thank you.
And there are one or two more issues where the government is already working for the long-term planning. Then these are resolved. Which I think not only state bank, but whole of the banking system will certainly get into, because it also complies with the ESG governance, as well as makes a good, sensible, bankable proposition. With that, bank should be able to play a very major role in coming years.
Thank you, Mr. Jaiswal. With this, we have come to the end of the first round of the opening remarks of the panelists. Each one of them has come out with the initial set of thoughts. Let me now go back to Yasmin, who talked about the task force on financial disclosure and how the UK government is aggressively implementing the implementations of the TCFD, and it has taken a large number of steps to accelerate sustainable investments. So, Yasmin, in your view, how would you rate the performance of the UK's financial system? To what extent do you think it has moved towards larger or deeper shades of green, and what are the lessons for this in India?
Thank you, Mr. Ashmi. That's a very big question. I think so. There are two different sides to be able to answer that question. One is on what the government has done and how the national and financial institutions are leading the way in policy terms. And then I think there's a question about what the financial sector in the UK is doing and has done to sort of advance the topic and sophistication around climate in the UK. So on the first one, the last month has been very big in the UK. The Prime Minister published a 10-point plan in the middle of November for a green industrial revolution in the UK. Part of that, one of the points was around green finance, climate finance, and within that, there were a few announcements. One was around the implementation of TCFD and making that mandatory. Another one was around the commitment to develop a UK taxonomy as the UK leaves the EU at the end of this year. A third one was around sovereign green bonds, which of course in India you're already very involved in and advanced at. And that's also in combination with what national authorities like the Bank of England have announced around, in particular in November, around climate stress testing, which will be the focus of their centralized stress testing exercise in 2021. So overall, we've seen a lot of progress, in particular in the last month on the policy side. But I think what's very important to underline is that much of that policy leadership really came from momentum from the private sector. And maybe that's a key lesson that this audience would be interested in learning and in hearing about. Before the UK made its announcement, for example, on making the TCFD mandatory by 2025, support for that disclosure regime had grown to over 1,600 organizations. That is internationally, not just in the UK, but clearly the lesson there is about how you as private sector entities can really start the momentum, show the way on leadership for these initiatives, which then can give the government the sort of strength of conviction and understanding that this is important for you as well. So I think that's a very important lesson to learn. I think I would actually, I think I will probably try to stop there. The one thing I think is just worth referencing is the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative published some investment readiness guidelines also in November, and I think there's some lessons around the interaction between policy environments and private sector action. So the sort of where public and private sectors can come together to work together to sort of drive this agenda forward. Where one of the recommendations was around the importance of creating enabling policy environments to facilitate the kind of investment that some of our other panelists have been talking about, not just from a UK perspective into India, but also domestically within India. So where capital is there and ready to get deployed, that's the commitment from the private sector side, and it needs to be matched, I think, from policy action. But those two things could be a chicken and egg. The important thing is to make sure that those actors from the private sector who can, who are, I think, in the audience for this panel and who can sort of set the direction of what they want to see, can take the first step in trying to unlock something like that, which will be critical for the growth and advancement of this greening the financial system and using that to really help the whole economy transition to green, to net zero, to align with the Paris goals, which is the ultimate aim of everything that we're talking about.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. It seems a number of steps have already been taken, and the fact that the UK financial system will include TCFD as one of the mandatory norms by 2025 is a very important signal for the rest of the world. Thanks very much. Mr. Amit Rama, I'm sorry I couldn't hear a lot of what you said. I had lost my connections in between. But I know that you have been closely following the Indian corporate investments, and you are one of the leading players there. So, and one of the key questions which normally comes up in any corporate decision-making process is what are the climate risks or the environmental risks which they should take note of. So do you think the Indian corporate world is ready for this kind of decision-making where they internalize the climate risks or environmental risks? And then does it make a business sense for them, or do you think there are other the kind of signals required to actually drive them in this direction?
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi. So I think the Indian corporate world is already facing some of these challenges, perhaps in very specific situations. So let's say industrial facilities in flood-prone areas that are suffering more frequent floods because of climate change. But in terms of whether they've systematically incorporated it into their regular decision-making for all commercial and industrial activity is something I don't have visibility over, but I think not everyone is thinking about it. It's fair to say, even in Europe, where we based, not all corporate boards are thinking about climate risks across all their commercial activities. It is a theme that has risen in the corporate agenda over the last 2-3 years, and I think in the Indian corporate system there will be a similar, let's say, prioritization of this topic in board discussions. I think in terms of policymakers, certain acts that could accelerate the prioritization of these decisions is, for example, our colleagues here at the Institute of Chartered Accountants are considering various disclosure standards and so on. The London Stock Exchange has imposed disclosure standards on listed companies. Similarly, if SEBI, beyond the green bonds disclosure requirements, imposes similar disclosure requirements on equity issuers on the stock exchanges in India, that would start accelerating the consideration around this topic and make it a bigger area of focus for those corporates. But please note that I think large industrials in India are already thinking about this, but we need everyone to be thinking about this, and it's that nuance that I'll highlight. Sorry, Mr. Rashmi, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you very much for pointing out that there is still a long distance to be covered by most of the corporate entities, not only in India, but in the rest of the world, in Europe and elsewhere as well. But certainly, there are ways in which these challenges have to be, can be tackled, and steps can be taken. So let me now turn to Mr. Singhal, who, for his guidance on this matter. You talked about, Mr. Rama, about disclosure norms by equity issuers. Mr. Singhal, one of the requirements which SEBI has imposed on the corporates in India is that they must, the top 1,000 listed companies must have a business responsibility report in requirement. And there are elements in that report which are being discussed and going to be finalized now. So what do you think is corporate world in India can do? Do you think some specific measures need to be taken?
Yeah, Mr. Rashmi, yes. Let me tell you that now this BRR is being replaced by BRSR. I think there's a background noise. If I can request the fellow, yeah. So this BRR is being replaced by BRSR from the next year, which is Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. And these new requirements are actually very comprehensive and very different from the existing requirements. Also, what is likely to happen is that, Mr. Rashmi, I think someone's audio is unmute. Okay. So, actually, this is proposed to be applied to all listed entities and some select unlisted entities above a certain threshold. And the beauty of these BRSR is that there is a classification between the mandatory disclosures and the leadership disclosures. So if a company is very forward looking, then they can give various leadership disclosures. And it is expected that over a period of time, these leadership disclosures will also become the mandatory disclosures. So since it is mandatory from next year, this year is only voluntary. I think corporate India should do actually a dry run of these disclosures in this year. They may or may not publish it. And because this is a very comprehensive requirement, I can tell you, while we may say that the benefits will exceed the cost, but there will be a cost also of these disclosures. A lot of preparation will be required. And SEBI is also re-looking at whether something else should also be asked for or something should be modified. and so they have already asked for the comments. So corporate India, I think, should actually do a dry run in this year, and these disclosures, if they are if these are being given in the true spirit, will really be very, very helpful. I would also like to see that these being converted into a sustainability index, and at the same time these be linked to the sustainable development goal 2030. That will actually help more.
Mr. Singhal,
Yeah.
sorry for interrupting. Annapurna, I'll have to leave for another VC on an International Financial Stability Board related thing. So please, friends, carry on. I'm absolutely excited with the level of participation and the activity going on. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mohapatra.
Thank you.
So Mr. Rashmi, I would like to say that I was saying that, if we can develop a sustainability scorecard, and also at the same time, whether a sustainability index we can call it, and also link them with the sustainable development goal, particularly the measures which Niti Aayog is taking. I think that will really integrate the whole thing. So a lot still need to be done by the corporate India on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singhal, for these very precise and very forward-looking thoughts. The million-dollar question, naturally, of course, would be based on this sustainability index. How will the financial system provide capital and finance to these corporates? Will it adversely affect their, sustainability or their corporate viability? This is something which needs to be also seen. Are we ready for this? And to what extent can we motivate them to move in this direction? Thank you very much for your thoughts. Let me turn to Mr. Jaiswal, who is actually a practitioner himself, and he did talk about some of the policy constraints which which need to be resolved. He talked about policy certainty for the renewable sector. There were some moves made to renegotiate the power purchase agreements, and that was going to cause a lot of hardship to the investors. So policy certainty is naturally one of the prime considerations. But Mr. Jaiswal, apart from this, do you see there are any other gaps which our financial system needs to close, and some other constraints which need to be removed in terms of specific policy measures which you think are critical for mobilizing and moving our sustainable investments?
I will say that any banker, from banking point of view, any banker is comfortable as long as there is a certainty of reasonability of returns to them and safety of the funds. So whatever is we have been finding, there has been a priority area for all the banks, and banks have been comfortable with the solar and wind. But these are a very long drawn project, 20-25 years, PPAs for 25 years. The silver lining is that their execution time is hardly 1 year or so. So that is a risk is minimized. But recently what I have seen, there are certain, to make the things viable and more predictable, only then we think the way the banks have recently moved in the green financing, they will move certainly very fast. First of all, regarding this, I have recently found that in latest PPAs have been found at a very cheap rate, 2.05, 2.10, and all these things. That is making the project not so viable as far as banking is concerned. So earlier, last bid, in the last bid of the SECI, bidding was at at the minimum was 2.36. So let us see, technology is improving and output is improving, but a very thin margin biddings are happening for a period of 25 years or so. This has been an area of concern for the bankers, because a minor deviation in any particular year in the irradiation, the things go haywire and there is no further backup in the system.
Thank you.
And the other thing which is hindering, which is not, we are not able to move that fast as we should, is the land records. Because whenever we install a project, we certainly would like to charge that land. Normally it takes 3 years, 4 years, even after COD 2 years, 3 years. This has one of the issues. As I have already told you, renegotiation of EPA is the major issue, another major issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
These
Jaiswal. I think
things are major. These 2-3 things are major. If they are resolved to a certain extent, then speed can be fantastic.
okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jaiswal. These are very valid suggestions, and thank you for stressing the need of certainty and our ability to support the long-term investments. With this, actually, we have come to the end of the session, and we have actually overshot the time given to us. I would have loved to take some questions up from the floor, but unfortunately, we can't do that now. So let me now just sum it up here and say that I would like to thank each one of the panelists for their very, very extremely informative and useful remarks. We have learned a lot. In fact, some of the ideas which have come up are extremely valuable for the India's financial system and the corporate sector. The idea of creating a sustainability index for the corporates, integrating the disclosure norms at the time of issuing the equity, the enlarging the green bonds, focusing on the ESG governance issues, and of course, a taxonomy for finance, which helps us move towards sustainable finance at a much larger scale. So thank you very much once again to each of the panelists, and let me now move over to Annapurna for closure of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi. May I request Mr. Rahul Ahluwalia, the first secretary from the British High Commission, New Delhi, to give his concluding remarks and close the session. Thank you.
Very much, Annapurna, and thank you. I think we had an excellent discussion today. I'll keep this short because I know we're slightly over time. Today we covered a huge range of initiatives at the domestic level in both countries, the bilateral level, and the global level. And what I can see is that there are plenty of opportunities to collaborate, to deepen our partnership in this field, and to build on the productive engagement that we've already seen at the highest levels. Just a couple of weeks ago, between the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Indian Finance Minister at the Economic and Financial Dialogue, agreeing a new mandate for a sustainable finance forum between the UK and India. We already have private sector working groups. We have think tank collaborations, and there's G2G partnerships already. So what I'm confident about is that today's discussion will help us build on all of this productive engagement on both mobilization, greening the financial system, and far beyond that. So I hope that we will be able to use today as a springboard to even deeper collaboration. Can I just say a big thank you to all of our speakers, but especially colleagues from the Indian Finance Ministry and the UK government dialing in from London. A huge thank you to them, but also to my colleagues at the British High Commission and Terry for putting together this excellent session. And I look forward to many more in the run-up to COP26 this time next year in Glasgow, and look forward to seeing many of you in person now that we may have a vaccine on the horizon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. And it was a fascinating session. We move in, and we hope the participants who are here will join us tomorrow, same time, 3:30 India time, for our next session on nature-based solutions. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.